MAXX-C is a fundamentally broken card. If used against an opponent, it effectively prevents them from special summoning, or else face you getting enough cards to win the game regardless. It's very powerful going second, as it can lock out an opponent's turn if they don't draw a counter, or it can stop an opponent from breaking your board if used going first. At worst, it functions as an upstart goblin. In every scenario, it threatens to win games on its own. It's so strong and popular that it has the highest play rate of any card in Master Duel, usually sitting above 90%. That being said, it's not to say that it doesn't have counters, as it does. The second highest played card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is Ash Blossom, a card that directly counters MAXX-C, called by the Grave, Crossout Designator, and many have counters like Triple Tactics Talent or in Archetype Negates. You could also be one of the lucky few decks that aren't dependent on special summons like Flunderees, or have access to a low special summon play like Kashtira. But these really only function as half measures, since almost every meta deck will be dependent on special summons, or players will just have to get lucky enough to draw the cards in their hand. There's also the question of if we should be arbitrarily removing decks from the metagame, just because they can't handle a single staple card. Plus, not to mention, the frustration that comes with having to counter or risk losing outright is kind of insane. This, generally, is where the agreed upon truth for this card ends, at least for the English side of the game anyway. Almost since its inception, MAXX-C has been a divisive card. If there are three things that the community loves to bring up over and over again for views, it's ban list, card prices, and hand traps, particularly MAXX-C. Some people even go so far as to make it their entire personality to hate the card. There's article after video after post claiming that this card should be banned. And from my previous description of how this card functions, it seems like this is a very valid perspective. But then why is it still legal in both the online Master Duel format and the Asian OCG format? This video seeks to do a full analysis on MAXX-C and its impact on the game. We'll be going through the statistics and actual in-game data on what MAXX-C does, how it affects deck list, how it affects win rate, and what type of strategies do players commonly implement to play around it. I really want to dive into how MAXX-C works as a game piece. But before we look at that, let's go over the card's history. MAXX-C was first released as a TCG exclusive card back in 2011 in the set Storm of Ragnarok, alongside archetypes like the legendary Six Samurai, Nordic, and Vylons of all things. We don't know too much about the creation of the card, but based on some designer statements around the time, it was very likely created to counter fast combo decks like Six Samurai. At the time of release, and for the immediate formats afterwards, MAXX-C wouldn't be overwhelmingly popular in decks either in the main or side deck. But when it would be ran, it would function either as a 1 or 2 of in a main deck, and usually only in the fastest formats of that era. The argument for this would typically be along the lines of, you want to open it, but if you didn't open it, you don't want to draw it. It wouldn't really start to gain traction consistently until around 2012, 2013, with faster formats like Dino Rabbit, Dragon Rulers, and Windups, often where the only other hand trap at the time, Effect Veiler, would also see play. And even then, it varied quite a lot with some decks, only running 1 or 2 copies of MAXX-C. This trend would continue. Throughout each format, MAXX-C would gain more and more popularity, till in about 2014, where it would eventually become the insane staple that it's known for. So, why did players initially sleep on MAXX-C? I'll let someone from the time try to explain.
It's not like last format, where in last format, every single deck had such an overwhelmingly powerful turn 1 play. You look at some of your matchups, and this is one of the reasons I'm really down on hand traps. Hand traps are absolutely phenomenal against a deck like Windup, but against a deck like Dino Rabbit, I don't think that you should be main decking, 4 copies of these hand traps when they might hit 4 good cards out of the deck.
Is that it? It just didn't work in a lot of matches? Well, yeah. There was at one point in Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats where half or more meta decks just wouldn't need to special summon immediately. Formats like Hat, where the best deck could just wait a turn. Of course, these were the formats that MAXX-C was designed for. It would be a tight side deck option against the few decks that happened to get a little too crazy. This was so true that players from some of these formats would almost feel punished for running it. So, what happened? Yu-Gi-Oh! Got faster. Like, a lot faster. And it would never stop getting faster. It's hard to say exactly when Yu-Gi-Oh! Started getting crazy, but it certainly was after the release of Duelist Alliance in 2014, which debuted the archetypes Shaddolls, Burning Abyss, and Satellite Knights, Around this time, meta decks and engines would shift to be more special summon and recursion focused, pushing the power level of boss monsters and combo starters to the next level. In these formats, because of how more closely tied the combos were to the gameplay of these decks, resolving a MAXX-C would always guarantee draw a minimum of 2 to 3 cards if an opponent just didn't want to end their turn. In a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, where 1 or 2 cards can combo off and beat your opponent or destroy their lead, it was just too much of an advantage against what was just the bare minimum to play the game. Of course, the game would keep getting faster, and in 2015, we'd see the release of Ghost Ogre, the first in a long line of Ghost Girl hand traps designed to let players counter an opponent's deck, even if they were going second. These hand traps also continued to further boost the power level of the draws you'd get off of a MAXX-C. A bit further into the future, in 2017, we would begin to see the overwhelming necessity of special summoning with the banning of Vanity's Emptiness, a trap card that flat out stopped both players from special summoning. Around this time, we'd also see faster and faster formats like Necros, Pepe, ABC, and Zodiac. Of course, MAXX-C was already being ran as a staple in these decks, but in these formats it would become more and more of a necessity, truly being one of the most played Yu-Gi-Oh staples of all time. MAXX-C would show up in each top 8 deck in the North American National Championships, a ridiculous feat also held by such legendary Yu-Gi-Oh cards like SP Little Knight, Ash Blossom, and Mystical Space Typhoon. Finally, MAXX-C would be semi-limited in 2016, limited in 2017, and then, only then, after all that terror, banned in 2018. Such ended the run of a once game-defining card, only to be spoken about in ban list explaining videos. Except, MAXX-C was never banned in the Japanese side of the card game. Now, there are a few things you have to understand about how OCG players view MAXX-C. As you'll find out, and in a ton of my sources, a lot of OCG players do also hate the card. It's just not as strong of a hatred as it is in the TCG. And really that's just because of how insane the TCG is. We're not reasonable. Generally speaking, the Japanese player base viewed the card differently. Instead of a blowout hand trap, MAXX-C would be viewed as a necessary staple, one strongly recommended to handle the game, instead of one that was required to get free wins. There's a bit more to this perspective. First, MAXX-C is seen by the casual player to hurt combo-oriented decks more than when compared to mid-range or control-style decks, with mid-range decks being able to build combos around minimizing the value, and control decks not really needing to special summon all that much. The idea is that good players would be rewarded for intentionally building their decks to have alternate combo lines to cancel out MAXX-C. In the eyes of OCG players, MAXX-C also has the effect of keeping the most absurd combo decks in check. Combo lines and combo pieces that are banned in the TCG are still legal for play in the OCG. Technically, these cards and decks were not as big of a problem as they were in the TCG. But we'll get more into the actual numbers behind this in a bit. Now let's hear it from someone with more experience with OCG players than me.
Most of them don't love it, but some of them also just feel like the game would go too crazy without it, right? And then they were like, we would be scared of so many things if MAXX-C was gone, right? Which, I mean, for us, all of those things are banned, right? They told me stuff like, hey, add Emancipator, like Block Dragon stuff, or weird FTKs, or Rongo, or Chaos Ruler. These type of decks would go way too crazy.
MAXX-C being banned in the West and embraced in the East would go on to be the biggest divide between the two formats, outside of price. And this worked for most people, outside of some very vocal opponents on each side. Both sides would live in harmony until Master Duel released, the introduction of an online format that would serve as a meeting ground between the TCG and OCG with its own unique card pool and ban list. Uniquely, the Master Duel ban list would be incredibly lenient, having some absurd and universally hated cards come off the ban list, such as number 86 Heroic Champion Ramanamanyad, Krishan Halki Fibrax, and floodgates like Kaiser Coliseum. A lot of Master Duel's identity would come from the absolute insanity that these cards would create in a best-of-1 format. And to top this all off, Master Duel would take a page out of the OCG book and leave our favorite card MAXX-C at 3 for the game's release. Thus began the newest waves of the ban MAXX-C debate. However, despite how much TCG players have complained, MAXX-C has still not been banned in Master Duel or in the OCG. Here's the part of the video you've all been looking forward to. I'm going to do my best to present empirical evidence, and from that data, I'm going to draw reasonable conclusions about MAXX-C, hopefully in a much more logical and sound way than a lot of other YouTubers do. Let's start with the question, does MAXX-C affect deck building? We can analyze MAXX-C's impact on deck building by looking at two key groupings of cards, common counter cards and MAXX-C itself. The first thing to see is that MAXX-C does consistently show up competitively in every modern format it is legal. For competitive Master Duel and OCG events, the play rate is almost exclusively 100%, with a few notable exceptions during the introduction of formats with decks like Flunderies. This trend follows through with Master Duel, with the average players using the card at an average 90% play rate, which makes sense, assuming that newer or casual players wouldn't have access or knowledge of the card. Overall, MAXX-C doesn't meaningfully change play rate once it is legal in a format. This is obvious, but let's get into the more interesting numbers. How does MAXX-C's being legal affect counter cards like Ash Blossom and Called by the Grave? Here's a chart comparing Ash Blossom's usage and top 16 deck list in major TCG events in various formats. While being very consistent, Ash Blossom notably dips in formats such as Teal'c Shizu, where the card only shows up in 1 or 2 decks in the top 16, or in other formats such as Drytron Bird Up, where only about 12 out of the 16 decks would run Ash Blossom. This data is in stark contrast to Master Duel, where Ash Blossom never dips in usage. Things get really funky when we add in OCG usage. It largely matches the same dips in the TCG when compared format by format. Ash Blossom's usage rate is inflated in the OCG, but it still largely matches. We can take from this data that while MAXX-C does encourage more people to run Ash Blossom's usage as a card generally is often more important than its use to counter MAXX-C. We can also look to explain Ash Blossom's usage in Master Duel being so high, as it is a best-of-1 format where players only get one game, meaning players need to rely on generic cards like Ash Blossom to do a lot more heavy listing, much more consistently. There are a few things I should note about the OCG data I've taken here. There's a lot more lower-level events used than for the TCG, as well as a ton of team events. This is because deck lists are just kind of harder to find, so I've just had to take from a wider pool of data to get the same validity to my conclusions. For Called by the Grave, it follows a similar pattern. I will note that if a deck contained Ash Blossom, it is very likely to also contain Called by the Grave. Some facts not shown by the graph is that combo and mid-range decks tend to run both Ash Blossom and Called by the Grave, while control decks tended to not run either. Called by the Grave tends to follow Ash Blossom's usage in a format. Another fun thing to note here is that Ash Blossom is also most commonly replaced by Herald of the Orange Light in formats where its usage dips. Orange Light is a deck-specific card that functions as an Ash Blossom but better in these niche formats. So you also could make the argument that Ash Blossom's usage never really dips, it just gets power crept. So really, Called by the Grave and Ash Blossom are good generic cards, but their usage in formats tends to follow more so with how good they are as generic cards, as opposed to how they're used against MAXX-C specifically. I'd personally lean to saying that MAXX-C does impact deck building, particularly from itself being at 3 and increasing in usage to cards that counter it. However, to the extremes that some people say MAXX-C inflates countercard usage, I think it's not dramatically that bad. It is noticeable, but in formats with or without MAXX-C, these cards still follow the same trends in usage. MAXX-C also doesn't seem to counter the average combo deck, but we'll come more to a conclusion after the next section. Here's the most interesting statistic. After being resolved, what is MAXX-C's win rate? Well, unfortunately, since Master Duel only tells us the top results for which cards have the highest win rates, usually being niche combo enablers and decks that people just don't like, we'll have to collect our own source of data. To get a solid grasp, I analyzed the semifinals and finals of the Yugioh Master Duel World Championships, and here's what I found. After resolving MAXX-C, 63.64 of games would result in that player winning, either going first or second. MAXX-C would be negated 47.37% of the time it was activated. More specifics like if MAXX-C were stronger going first or second, I can't draw from my collection of data, since the sample size is too limited. I would, however, like to theorize that MAXX-C gave a sizable boost to anyone who used it going second. But again, I need more numbers to solidify this. Which, luckily, We can verify my information by comparing it to user Prismachete on Reddit, who did his own analysis of the entirety of the YCS, not just the later rounds like I did. He concluded that the win rate of player 1 when they do not activate /resolve MAXX-C versus when they do activate resolve MAXX-C is 54.5% versus 65.6%. He also concluded that the win rate of player 2 when they do not activate /resolve MAXX-C versus when player 2 activates or resolves at least one MAXX-C to be 40% versus 48.6%. The only real difference in our data is that he concluded MAXX-C resolved 77.6% of the time instead of my calculated 66%. It's very great work from Prismachete, and it's worth your time to read his write-up. He goes into more detail than I did with mine, but I just had to verify the information myself. You can look through my data, which I'll post alongside my sources in the description. Now, there is some important facts I want to make clear about this data. First, the Master Duel World Championship had a limited card pool format. Teams had to only pick 3 cards to be shared between decks. All teams picked the cards MAXX-C and Ash Blossom, usually as well as a third option to further counter hand traps, typically being an option like Called by the Grave or Triple Tactics Talent. Now, despite the odd format, it's still a very good indicator of how MAXX-C operates at the highest competitive level. We can tell from the 47% negate number that MAXX-C getting countered is basically just a coin flip. Even in better formats, that's only going to get a bit higher. That 63% win rate number tells us a few things. First, it's high enough to indicate that MAXX-C is extremely strong in the game. Kind of obvious, I know, but it's worth confirming. This is the highest caliber of players, and even with the best resistance, it's still more likely than not to result in a win on its own. MAXX-C is also a very powerful tool to help go second, albeit at the cost of making some priority player wins very sharp and very extreme. Let's break down further what's happening with these numbers. Within these games, one of 4 things would happen. Most likely, MAXX-C would get negated. Second most likely, MAXX-C would shut down a turn completely, and the MAXX-C player would push for game from there. The third and fourth options are less straightforward. In these games, either the player would take specific countermeasures to play around it, or the game would progress into a grind game, with the MAXX-C player winning for a variety of hard-to-track reasons, but most likely the swing in value for MAXX-C. Within these games, there have been some crazy answers to the MAXX-C challenge. Did my favorite moment from the World Championship had Tasaku Kobanawa counter an opponent's MAXX-C by using it to deck them out. That's just so cool. So, technically, if you wanted to be a jerk, in some niche cases, you could call MAXX-C a skill issue. But A, this doesn't account for the brutality of those other 60% of wins, and B, it doesn't account for how MAXX-C is for the average, more casual player. While personally, I believe we should balance mostly for the higher levels, we can't not acknowledge that MAXX-C would have a significantly higher win rate if we looked at the player base as a whole. This section of data builds up to the argument of MAXX-C being significantly overpowered. It also gets countered a significant portion of the time, and often can be played around. However, there's also an extremely large portion of games where it entirely just comes down to luck. So whether or not you're okay with that really comes down to your perspective on how luck and player skill should be implemented in a card game. But there is a numerical backing to ban the card. This section of data also reinforces the theory that MAXX-C doesn't really stop combo decks. Players will not deterred at all in their deck selection, with a majority of decks being either tempo or full-on combo decks. Before moving into the final section, I need to make the statement that it is likely that MAXX-C is uniquely problematic in Master Duel's regular format. The format has one major problem. Instead of being a best of 3 like Worlds, the OCG or the TCG, Master Duel is a best of 1, meaning a player doesn't have the chance to run back a loss or have the luck get statistically smoothed out. Due to the luck-based nature of card games, it is extremely likely that a player will inevitably draw a combo of cards so insane as to blow out a player without recourse. However, this is statistically improbable, as most hands will settle around a fair and more average set of cards. While a best of 3 increases the odds of a fair test of skill, a best of 1 makes for quicker games. However, a best of 1 also makes for more luck-based encounters with each individual opponent. It's why Master Duel had to so harshly ban floodgates. There is more than enough justification to say that MAXX-C should be removed from Master Duel, or better yet, Master Duel should add in a best of 3 or rematch option to compensate. So then, what is the point of MAXX-C? Does it balance the game? Well, if you ask the OCG player base, it helps keep in check the extremes and is a good tool to aid going second. If you ask the TCG player base, it is the problem itself, as it creates an unfair advantage to the player activating the card and can just blow out decks on its own. From a look at the numbers, it does seem to have some truth in both directions. While it certainly adds to the sharpness of Yu-Gi-Oh's wins and losses, it's not the largest driving factor of game balance by itself. The best strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are almost always strong enough to exist anyway outside of the Roach's influence. It changes almost nothing about the metas it's in, all while the random nature of a card game keeps the actual impacts of a generic card like MAXX-C all over the place. It leaves MAXX-C as just being another strong game piece that sometimes wins games on its own, in a sea of other cards that also just sometimes win games on their own. I find MAXX-C more of a question of how much luck you're okay with in a game that's already stacked with luck. It certainly adds an insane level of variety to each hand, and some players would find that to be more important and even more fun than game balance. Is a 10% swing and wins too much, or is a 5% too much? If you draw the line there, then there's certainly other cards that get close to, or even higher to those swings. They're just usually not generic, or extremely format dependent. But let's drive on the bigger question. Is MAXX-C fun? Of course, it's the toughest question in the video to ask. I think MAXX-C is in that awful spot of game design, where it's fun to use, but super unfun to have it used against you. Then again, that's just a large part of Yu-Gi-Oh! And games in general. So it does have legitimacy to exist. But then again, is such a decisive win off one card fun for everyone? Certainly not. And I'll reiterate that losing to MAXX-C feels bad. But then again, playing around it can feel rewarding for a player who prepares for it. Then again, is having the combos you built your deck around not going off even more miserable. All this to say, I don't know if MAXX-C is fun. What then should we do to MAXX-C? I'd lean towards banning it. I've been asking the question of where do you draw the line with powerful cards, and MAXX-C definitely crosses it for me. I'd also like a MAXX-C-like effect to stick around, one with the problems ironed out. At the end of the day, the role of a non-archetypal go second, yet still useful going first game piece, is such a unique boost to the flow of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards like Dark Ruler No More and Droll Mockbird don't give as much freedom to the player playing around them. These say no entirely, and MAXX-C offers a choice. It's a false choice in a lot of cases, but it's still a choice. Imagine a MAXX-C that has a hard cap on the number of cards drawn if used going first, or maybe make it less valuable if using other disruptions in a turn. Like an effect that changes if you control another card or activate a card effect. Honestly though, I'd just like to see some of the discussion on MAXX-C move forward with this video, and get less dogmatic and more open to change, and actual data being presented. Look, I get it that a lot of people hate the card, but with some of the discussion around it, it's just bad. No one is winning. I've seen some awful arguments. It just boils down to the same few points over and over. And they're all often misunderstood, and it never goes beyond the card itself. Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't just MAXX-C. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a card game with specific interactions that come from unbalanced game pieces. MAXX-C is broken on its own, but I feel like an argument about MAXX-C should come more from its role as a game piece in a larger game, rather than it being strong or weak. Which, if I did a good enough job getting to that in this video, I hope I did. But I'll leave that for you guys to judge. MAXX-C is Yu-Gi-Oh!'s terror. Despite its rocky start, it has risen to prominence as one of the most important staple cards in the game's history. It's the most hotly debated Yu-Gi-Oh! Card ever, and due to Konami's weird insistence it stays, it's likely not going anywhere anytime soon. As a game piece, MAXX-C is incredibly important, and honestly kind of welcome. The problem with this is it just does way too much as it is right now. I'm interested to see if new developments in the card game further change this card's role as a game piece. I do think we'll get there eventually. Konami's getting more and more experimental with how interactive and fast their cards are. But until then, I'd like to ask you all to subscribe and present you with a concept I have created and hate. Anti-MAXX-C. This card is funny, but honestly, I would just want to see how actual good players make builds to deal with this. Who knows? 2 MAXX-C might solve the MAXX-C problem, or much more likely make it way worse.
MAXX-C is a good card.
So it's pretty good.
I like it. It works. You want deck the card?
I have no idea what it does.
I've actually experienced it being played on me, and I play it. I do my combos, but it's not. You know, I'm considering to stop now.
I actually had it teched into my frog deck by accident. It actually it helped me.
Most of the decks that are siding in MAXX-C, once they draw all those cards, I'm done next turn. So I'm gonna think about it. If I don't OTK that turn, I'm gonna it's gonna stop me from special summoning.
You deck out.
Alright, MAXX-C.
It's alright.
That's what I'm talking about.
Alright.
It's alright.
By the way, if you do want to react to this video, I ask that you give me credit, ask first, and actually make it transformative. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.